Garrett kept telling himself it was just a school pickup. Just folding chairs and backpacks and the sound of sneakers on the asphalt. Just a line of parents, each one holding a phone, like it was a lifeline, each one scanning the same patch of sidewalk, as if the next few minutes would decide something bigger than the day. He'd been doing this routine since morning traffic and the first bus route, since the end of summer, when the air still smelled faintly like cut grass, and lately the routine was the only thing that felt real. He sat in his car with the engine off, the way he'd started doing, after his grief began to take up space, ways he couldn't ignore. The radio was always off. He couldn't bear a song starting without him choosing it. He couldn't bear his own thoughts when they found the softest places to land, the school parking lot filled with motion. A van door slammed. Laughter bounced off the brick wall. A kid's voice rang out like a bell. Garrett watched it all through the windshield and felt his chest tighten anyway. He pictured his son, Theo, already inside, with the other students, the teacher, finishing up their day. Theo always moved fast, too fast for how cautious Garrett wanted to be, and Garrett felt both pride and fear in the same breath. After everything, he wanted to protect Theo from the way the world could turn sharp without warning. He glanced at the clock. 2 minutes past pickup time. He checked his phone, then set it face down. He didn't need updates. He didn't need anyone reminding him of deadlines or emails or paperwork. So, what he needed was Theo walking toward him with the backpack strap pulled tight across his chest, cheek flushed from running, telling him about the science project or the joke that had made everyone giggle. Then he saw the other car. It was parked one row over, angled the same way Garrett's always was, as if both of them followed the same instinct. The man inside stepped out and stretched, and Garrett recognized him instantly, not from friendship or familiarity, but from the way he'd been introduced at work. Caleb. Garrett had heard the name first in a meeting room with stale coffee and fluorescent lights. Caleb was the one people used a particular tone for, respectful, careful, as if his title itself had edges. Manager, senior coordinator. The kind of boss whose decisions were passed down like weather forecasts. Inevitable and not to be argued with. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just spoke with certainty, and everyone else adjusted. Garrett hadn't meant to find him familiar. He hadn't meant for their worlds to overlap like this. He'd only wanted Theo's school day to be a place where no one from work followed him home. But Caleb was here walking toward the entrance with a reusable water bottle in one hand and a lunch bag in the other. His posture was steady, not rushed. He moved like someone used to being responsible for too many moving parts. And something about that, about the way grief had made Garrett feel untethered, made him notice the steadiness like a lifeline. Theo's teacher finally herded the children out. The sound of the group spilling into the parking lot hit Garrett like relief. He put the car in drive and rolled forward, stopping at the curb when Theo appeared. Theo's face lit up. "Dad." Garrett's throat tightened. "Hey, buddy. You ready?" Theo ran toward him, backpack bouncing with each step. Garrett got out and knelt automatically, catching Theo in a familiar embrace that felt like muscle memory. Theo smelled like the same soap Garrett used at home. Theo's hair was damp from the playground. When Garrett pressed his cheek to Theo's, the world shifted back into its proper shape for a moment. Behind Theo, Garrett saw Caleb, waiting near the front of the pickup line. Caleb wasn't watching Garrett in a way that demanded attention. He was doing something more difficult, waiting politely, letting time pass without filling it. Garrett stood and shouldered Theo's bag on his shoulder, like he'd always done. "Bye, MS. Rivera," Theo called. "See you tomorrow," she replied, her smile warm, her eyes dropping briefly to Garrett's face, like she recognized the tiredness he tried to hide. Garrett nodded. He guided Theo toward the passenger side of his car. Then, in the space between Theo climbing in and Garrett closing the door, Caleb stepped closer. He moved like he'd rehearsed this moment and still didn't feel prepared. "Garrett?" Caleb asked. Garrett flinched slightly at his name being spoken in a place that should have been safe. Yeah, he forced his voice to stay calm. Hi, Caleb smiled, small and careful, as if he didn't want to startle anyone. Sorry, Theo's in my son's class. Garrett blinked, surprised. You have. He stopped himself. He'd almost asked the wrong thing. The personal thing, he swallowed. What's your kid's name? Caleb's eyes softened. Ellie. He's pretty loud. Theo laughed from the passenger seat, craning his head out. Eli is cool. Garrett startled at the casual way Theo said it, like he'd already formed a connection. He hadn't even noticed the boys talking. At playground time, Caleb chuckled, and the sound was different from his work, voice lighter, more human. Well, then you must be Theo. Caleb crouched slightly so his face was at Theo's eye level. Eli talks about you. Theo grinned, delighted. Garrett felt a strange twist in his chest, something like hope, something like jealousy of how easily a kid could decide they belonged. Garrett opened his door to get in, but he hesitated. He looked at Caleb's hands. There was a faint smudge of peanut butter near one knuckle, like the lunch bag had been opened too quickly. Garrett had seen those exact kinds of messes in his own kitchen. It made Caleb feel less like a title, more like a person. Thank you for being here, Garrett said, realizing he sounded awkward. Caleb's expression shifted barely perceptible, like he knew, like he understood what it cost to be here. It's pickup, Caleb said quietly. It's normal, Garrett swallowed, not believing in normal anymore. Right? Caleb stood, adjusted his jacket. I'm supposed to not talk to employees outside work. Garrett froze. The words landed with a weight Garrett hadn't expected, not because Caleb had said them, but because Caleb had spoken like he was apologizing. Garrett's mind reached for his own coping habits. Do not make it worse. Do not make it personal. Keep your life separate. But Caleb had already crossed that invisible line. Garrett forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. You're the boss? Caleb's lips pressed together for a second. Then he exhaled. Yes. Okay, Garrett said. Then, hi boss. He watched Caleb's gaze flick to Theo, as if reminding himself there was a child between them. Caleb's voice lowered. I'm not here to make things complicated. Garrett felt his face warm. They already are. Caleb looked at him carefully, like he'd heard more than the words Garrett meant to say. For a moment, the parking lot noise blurred. Garrett could only hear Theo buckling his seatbelt and the distant squeal of a scooter. I'm Dylan, a man called from the other side, stepping forward with a friendly confidence that belonged to people who weren't afraid of awkwardness. Sorry, I'm late. Traffic, Dylan. Garrett's chest tightened again. Dylan had been in Garrett's workplace orbit too, though not as close. Another parent, another connection, another coincidence that made Garrett feel watched. Dylan's grin was easy. He held up a phone like he had just realized he'd been holding it too long. His eyes flicked between Theo and Garrett, assessing in that way adults did when they wanted to be liked. Say. Caleb straightened slightly beside Garrett, his face smoothing back into professional neutrality. Hey, Dylan said to Caleb, Eli's giving me trouble. He wants a snack, Caleb smiled faintly. Theo can have one too if he behaves. Theo lit up. I always behave. Garrett wanted to laugh, and couldn't. Instead, he watched Caleb for a reaction, watched the way Caleb's expression didn't quite match the words. Like Caleb had said the sentence, but something else lived beneath it. Garrett got into the car, started the engine, and pulled away slowly. He didn't look back right away. He needed Theo's seatbelt click to anchor him. Theo leaned forward. Dad. Mr. Crack. Ellie's dad is nice. Garrett gripped the steering wheel tighter than he meant to. He is nice. Are you going to talk to him again? Theo asked. Garrett swallowed. Maybe. Theo's eyes searched Garrett's face, as if he could tell when Garrett was holding something too tightly. "You don't look happy when you talk to people." Garrett's throat went tight. "I'm fine, buddy." Theo nodded slowly, unconvinced but trying to be kind. As they drove toward home, Garrett's mind replayed Caleb's earlier words. Not here to make things complicated. Not supposed to talk to employees outside work. Garrett had lost a partner to a grief that didn't ask permission. He hadn't come back from it all the way. He'd started dating apps and deleted them. He'd started casual conversations and then stopped. He told himself he couldn't afford to need anyone. Now Caleb had shown up at pickup steady, careful, and apparently conflicted. That night, after Theo fell asleep, Garrett stood in the kitchen with a bowl of cereal he didn't feel like eating. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering above messages he wasn't sure he could send. Caleb had texted him earlier that day. Nothing personal, just a brief work scheduling note. Garrett had responded politely. Nothing else. But Garrett wondered if Caleb had felt the way Garrett felt, caught between two roles that didn't want to coexist. A week passed in a blur of routines. Each morning, Garrett adjusted his schedule so Theo could meet the bus line safely. Each afternoon, pickup brought them back to the same patch of asphalt. Caleb arrived with Eli. Dylan sometimes hovered nearby like a friendly neighbor who didn't know when to step back. Caleb never tried to force a friendship. He made room. He asked about Theo's project, about Eli's science fair plan. He talked about kid stuff, like it was oxygen. And each time Garrett felt grateful, resentful at the same time. Grateful because Caleb treated him like a parent, not an employee. Resentful because Caleb's kindness reminded Garrett of a life he couldn't return to. And then came the incident. It wasn't dramatic like in movies. It was worse. It was the kind of problem that happened quietly and only mattered because it threatened something Garrett needed. Garrett arrived at work on a Monday morning with a coffee he hadn't finished. His inbox was full of small issues that looked manageable. He could handle manageable. He built his life around handling. The first email was from a director above Caleb's level. The second was from a client who'd gone quiet and then started demanding answers. The third was a forwarded message from Caleb, urgent. Garrett read it twice, then a third time as his stomach tightened. "Can you stay a little after?" Caleb asked when Garrett passed his office. Caleb's door was open, his desk light casting a clean rectangle on the carpet. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. Garrett's mind went blank. He had a dentist appointment scheduled for Theo. He had a babysitter reserved for later, if he needed to. Garrett's plans weren't flexible. They were built carefully like bridges. "I can," Garrett said carefully. "What's up?" Caleb gestured to the conference room. "It's about the Milton report." "There are discrepancies." Garrett sat, his hands resting on the table like he needed to prove they were steady. Caleb sat across from him, a folder between them. "We need to submit revisions by Wednesday," Caleb said. "The client is pushing. I can't have you blamed for it." Garrett stared at him. "Blamed?" Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "There's a risk, and I don't think it's fair." Garrett felt something inside him pull taut. "I didn't do anything." "I know," Caleb said immediately. Garrett's throat burned. He hated how quickly his anger turned to fear. He hated the way the workplace made him feel like he was always one mistake away from losing whatever he had left. Caleb slid the folder toward him. "But someone else did. And they're using your name because you touched the document earlier." Garrett flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned numbers and dates, and his stomach turned over. There were edits that didn't match his process. There were comments he didn't remember leaving. He had been careful. He always was. "What do you want me to do?" Garrett asked. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "I want you to tell me what you did on Friday." "Start there." Garrett's mind tried to reconstruct the timeline. Friday had been messy at home. Theo had gotten sick. Garrett had left early. He'd been distracted. He'd been trying to manage a sick kid, and still get work done, because that was how you survived. He had worked from home late that night, but he knew his own actions. He knew what he had sent. I uploaded the file, Garrett said slowly, reading his own memory like text. I sent it to the shared drive. I didn't touch it afterward. I didn't make these edits. Caleb's gaze held his. Okay, Garrett exhaled with a shaking breath. He couldn't stop. So who did? Caleb's lips pressed together. I'm trying to find out. Garrett looked at Caleb then, really looked. Caleb wasn't just doing his job. He was showing up like someone who cared about the outcome. Garrett didn't know what that meant, not in a workplace context, not after seeing Caleb's steady presence in pickup lines. He asked the question without meaning to. Why are you helping me? Caleb blinked, and for a second his face looked tired. Not tired like sleep deprived. Tired like carrying something too heavy for too long. I don't like seeing people get hurt, Caleb said. Garrett's chest tightened. Even if it makes things harder for you. Caleb's eyes met his, especially then. The conversation ended with next steps and deadlines. Caleb left Garrett with a plan to preserve drafts and logs, to trace the edits, to document everything. As Garrett walked back to his desk, his mind kept looping around Caleb's help. Garrett had gotten used to people, helping with conditions, with strings. He'd gotten used to favors that demanded a price later, but Caleb had helped without pushing for anything in return. That evening, Garrett drove to pick up with a different kind of dread. Not fear of being punished at work. Fear of what it meant that Caleb cared. When he arrived, Caleb was already there. Ellie was running in small circles near the chain-link fence, giggling as he chased a stray soccer ball. Caleb stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching his son without looking too anxious. Garrett spotted him and felt his legs go heavy. He walked over, Theo trailing behind him with a grin that didn't match Garrett's tension. Hey, Garrett said. Caleb turned. His face softened. You okay? Garrett glanced at the kids. I just got through a mess at work. Caleb nodded once. I figured you would. Garrett's throat tightened. It's not just me, is it? It's not just about documents. Caleb's expression flickered. What makes you think that? Garrett swallowed. Because you sounded like you knew it wasn't my fault. Caleb exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath all day. I do know. Garrett stared at him. Then why wait? Caleb's eyes dropped to Theo, and then back up. Because at work, I have to choose my battles carefully. And at pickup? Garrett asked. Caleb's mouth opened as if he had an answer prepared. Then he closed it. His gaze stayed on Garrett's face, steady and tender in a way that made Garrett's throat ache. Dylan appeared behind them, as if summoned by conversation. There you two are, Dylan called, friendly and bright. Ely wants to know where Theo got his dinosaur keychain. Theo pulled it out with pride. I found it, Caleb smiled at Theo, then turned his attention back to Garrett, like he was trying to keep the moment contained. Garrett felt something shift. It wasn't romance yet. It was something more dangerous. Recognition. He noticed the way Caleb avoided touching his shoulder, even when they were close. The way Caleb's eyes lingered a fraction longer than polite. The way Caleb's professionalism cracked when Garrett asked a direct question. For the first time, Garrett saw Caleb's carefulness as a kind of restraint rather than distance. After pickup, Garrett drove home and tried to eat dinner without tasting it. Theo talked about kindergarten games, about his lunchbox favorite stickers. Garrett nodded and asked questions, but his mind kept circling the same thought. Caleb wasn't just helping at work. Caleb was choosing Garrett. That night, after Theo was asleep, Garrett opened his laptop and pulled up the work logs again. He made notes. He traced the edit timestamps and found a pattern that made his skin go cold. There was a login that didn't match anyone in his team. There was a user ID that belonged to someone who had access to shared files. His heart hammered as he checked who had that access. Dylan. Garrett, stared at the screen until his eyes blurred. Dylan had been friendly. Dylan had been the supportive co-worker in meetings. Dylan had been the one who sometimes slid by Caleb's office with a grin. Garrett wanted to call someone. He wanted to confront Dylan right then. But he remembered the meeting, the quiet way Caleb had protected him. Garrett remembered what Caleb had said. Choose battles carefully. Garrett didn't know Caleb's reason for protecting him, but he suspected it wasn't only professional. He stood and walked to the living room, where his late partner's old picture sat on the shelf. Garrett didn't like looking at it, but he did it anyway because denial had never fixed anything. The picture showed two men at a backyard barbecue, laughing. Garrett didn't remember the exact moment the photo was taken, but he remembered the feeling of being believed, of being safe. Grief moved through him like a tide. He turned his phone over and over in his hands. He wanted to be angry at the world again, but his anger turned inward instead. What if he was wrong? What if Dylan had access for a work reason? What if he was just making excuses because he needed something to blame? Garrett's mind spiraled, then stopped abruptly when his phone buzzed. A text from Caleb? Can I talk tomorrow? Not at work. Just after pickup. Garrett stared at the screen until the letters settled into meaning. Just after pickup. Not at work. The words didn't sound romantic. They sounded careful. They sounded like someone stepping closer to a line they weren't sure they were allowed to cross. Garrett's pulse quickened. He should have said yes immediately. He should have told himself that connection was good. Instead, he typed and deleted. Finally, he sent, "Okay, where?" Caleb replied almost instantly. "In my truck. It's warm. We won't be long." Garrett swallowed hard. His mind flashed with images. Being in Caleb's truck like some secret. Being alone with his boss, being seen, but he also knew something else. He knew if Caleb wanted to reveal something, Garrett couldn't keep pretending there was only normal. The next day, pickup arrived faster than Garrett expected. The sun was lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Theo ran ahead with the kind of energy that made grief feel far away even when it wasn't. Garrett watched Caleb's truck. It was parked slightly behind the row, so it wasn't in the direct flow of parents. The heat must have been on, because when Garrett approached, he could feel the warmth spill outward faintly. Caleb stood near the driver's door, hands loose at his sides, looking like he'd been waiting, with the patience of someone who'd practiced, not showing urgency. Garrett approached carefully. "Hey." Caleb's eyes met his. There was a tremor in them Garrett didn't associate with Caleb's usual steadiness. "Hey," Caleb said again, softer this time. "Come on, we'll talk." Garrett glanced at Theo. Theo had already been distracted by a friend and was walking toward the playground with a cluster of kids. Garrett trusted Theo's teacher would call him in time. Garrett trusted Caleb wasn't going to do anything foolish. He opened the passenger door and slid in. The truck smelled faintly like coffee and cologne. The seats were warm. Garrett felt his shoulders loosen a fraction, like his body recognized safety, even if his mind couldn't agree. Caleb got in on the driver's side, but didn't start driving. He turned off the engine noise and just sat, looking at Garrett. "I think Dylan is involved," Caleb said immediately, voice quiet. Garrett's breath caught. "Involved? How?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "In the document edits. The login trail you found." Garrett stared. "You knew I would find it." Caleb's eyes held his. "Garrett, I know you're not the kind of man who would sabotage someone. I've watched how you work." Garrett felt heat behind his eyes. "Then why let it happen?" Caleb exhaled. "Because Dylan had leverage." "Leverage?" Garrett repeated. Caleb looked away for a second, like he was choosing which truth could be spoken without breaking something. He's connected to higher management. He's not just another employee." Garrett's hands clenched in his lap. "So he's protected." Caleb's gaze returned, steady and pained. "Yes." Garrett swallowed. Then you're protecting me, because… Caleb didn't finish the sentence. His eyes flicked down, then up. Because I didn't want you to be the one who took the fall. Garrett's throat tightened. Why me? Caleb's silence lasted long enough that Garrett's anxiety started chewing at his insides. Caleb's voice finally came out, low and careful. Because you remind me of myself when I wasn't brave enough to admit what I needed. Garrett blinked. What you needed? Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He seemed to be holding himself together by force. I've been straight, he said, the words sounding like confession rather than explanation. Garrett froze. His mind didn't know what to do with that sentence. Straight. The word carried history, carry-on baggage, everything Garrett had learned about how labels could protect people from scrutiny. Caleb continued, voice roughening. I said it like it was the truth for years. But it wasn't. Garrett's chest rose and fell too fast. You're? Caleb shook his head, not letting Garrett finish a sentence that would be too easy and too wrong at the same time. I'm a single father too, Garrett. Dylan's not. That matters. It affects everything. Garrett felt numb for a moment, like grief had turned numbness into muscle. Caleb looked at him, then really looked. I'm telling you because I trust you, and because I'm tired of being careful in a way that hurts people. Garrett's eyes burned. I'm tired of being careful too. Caleb's expression softened. I know. Garrett's throat made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a sob. Caleb's voice lowered. I didn't approach you at pickup because I wanted to make it awkward. I approached you because your kid needs someone who will show up, and because I saw how you handled Theo, like you were doing it with love, even while you were falling apart. Garrett swallowed hard. You don't know what falling apart feels like. Caleb's eyes flickered with sadness. I do. I just fell apart differently. Garrett stared at him, and then his gaze dropped to Caleb's hands. The steering wheel. The knuckles. The way Caleb's fingers had a faint ink stain, like he'd been filling out a permission form for a school field trip. Garrett's mind, stubborn and slow, started to believe the truth in Caleb's face. Caleb wasn't flirting. Caleb wasn't performing. Caleb was showing up the way Garrett had always wished people would. I don't know how to do this, Garrett admitted, voice shaking. Caleb's breath seemed to catch. Do what? Garrett searched for the right words. He hadn't had a partner in months. He hadn't had a safe conversation in longer. Let someone be kind to me, Garrett said, without panicking. Caleb's eyes glistened. Then let me. Garrett looked away, because the tenderness felt too close to his skin. Caleb reached toward him slowly, not grabbing his hand, hovered near Garrett's, an offering, a question. Garrett didn't move at first. His body fought a war between longing and fear. His grief had made him feel like love was something that came with a deadline, like the world would always take it back. But Caleb didn't rush. Caleb waited in a way that made Garrett feel less hunted. Garrett turned his hand and lightly touched Caleb's fingers. Caleb's breath shuddered. In the silence that followed, Garrett could hear the distant laughter of kids and the faint hum of the truck's heater. He could hear his own heart too loud. Caleb didn't kiss him yet. He just kept holding Garrett's hand like it was a fragile thing worth protecting. Garrett's eyes watered. What happens at work? He whispered. Caleb's thumb brushed gently over Garrett's knuckle. I'll handle it. I'll keep your job safe. And I'll be honest about what I want if you want it too. Garrett's voice cracked. I do. Caleb's gaze snapped up. You do? Garrett nodded, tears slipping down without permission. I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I'm tired of pretending I don't want. Caleb leaned in slightly, stopping just before the kind of closeness that would change everything. His forehead almost touched Garrett's. Garrett expected fear. Instead, he felt warmth. Caleb murmured, then don't pretend. The moment stretched, suspended between kids and parking lots, and the thin membrane of choice. Somewhere outside the truck, a parent called out a child's name. The sound faded quickly, but it reminded Garrett that life continued, no matter how personal this felt. Caleb's mouth barely grazed Garrett's, a promise rather than a demand. Garrett closed his eyes instinctively. The kiss lasted only a beat, but it landed like a full conversation. Garrett exhaled, and the tension inside him shifted, like a knot finally loosening. Caleb pulled back just enough to look at him. "Okay," Garrett nodded, breath unsteady. "Okay." Caleb's eyes softened. "Good." They stayed in the truck longer than planned, hands linked, foreheads almost touching. Caleb told Garrett about Eli's temperament, about the way Eli clung to Caleb's shirt when he got scared during storms. Garrett told Caleb how Theo slept with a small stuffed dinosaur because it made him feel safe. Talking felt like a bridge. It didn't erase grief, but it made room for something else. When Garrett finally pulled his hand back to check the time, he felt reluctant, like he was stepping away from an open door. "Hey," Garrett said softly. Caleb looked at him, waiting. Garrett's voice trembled. "We can't be reckless." Caleb's smile was small, tender. "I'm not asking to be reckless. I'm asking to be real." Garrett swallowed. "Real," Caleb nodded. "Real." Garrett got out of the truck and went to Theo. His legs felt strange, like he'd been on a boat, and the ground was adjusting. Theo looked up, the dinosaur keychain still in his hand. "Dad, can we stop for snacks?" Theo asked. Garrett blinked, and then he smiled genuinely. "Yeah, buddy. We can do snacks." Theo grinned and started walking, and Garrett followed like every step mattered. As he drove home, Garrett kept thinking about Caleb's earlier confession. Straight, then not. He thought about what it meant to come to love late, after grief, after self-protection. He thought about the way Caleb had waited for permission, rather than taking it. When they got home, Garrett tucked Theo in and sat on the edge of the bed, a little longer than usual, watching Theo's chest rise and fall. Theo looked safe. For a second, Garrett felt his grief loosen again. His phone buzzed. A message from Caleb: "Text me when you're home." Garrett stared at it. He typed and then erased, then typed again. He sent, "I'm home." Then after a pause, "Thank you for not rushing me." Caleb replied quickly, "I couldn't. Not with you." Garrett read it twice. Then a third time. That night, Garrett slept in small pieces. He dreamed of two hands holding each other on a winter-warmed steering wheel. He woke with the feeling of warmth on his cheek, and the lingering ache of wanting more without knowing how to ask. Over the next days, life didn't magically become easier. Work became tense. Garrett's emails started to be forwarded without explanation. Meetings involved Caleb's calm voice, paired with higher management's sharp eyes. Dylan's friendliness turned slightly colder, as if Dylan had realized Garrett had noticed. But Caleb protected Garrett in the ways that mattered. He backed Garrett's report revisions. He insisted on process transparency. He moved Garrett's work into a safer lane. He documented everything. It was like watching someone build a fence around a garden that had already been trampled. Garrett tried not to think about the truck kiss while he sat in conference rooms. Tried not to think about Caleb's fingers hovering before touching. Tried not to remember the sound of Caleb's breath when Garrett let him hold his hand. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Then one afternoon, Dylan confronted Garrett in the copy room. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The air smelled like paper and toner. "I heard you digging into things," Dylan said casually. Like he was making small talk, Garrett looked up from his printer tray. He kept his voice even. "Digging?" Dylan leaned back against the counter. "People talk. You have a habit of asking questions." Garrett felt his spine stiffen. He thought of Theo. He thought of Caleb's steady kindness. I'm doing my job, Garrett said. Dylan's smile thinned. Your job is to deliver results, Garrett, not to play detective. Garrett's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. I'm not playing. I'm correcting. Dylan's eyes flicked briefly to the door, like someone might be listening. Then, Dylan lowered his voice. You're making enemies. Garrett met Dylan's gaze. I can live with that. Dylan's smile faded. You don't know what you're stepping into. Garrett felt a calm settle over him, surprising even himself. I know what I'm stepping into. Dylan's eyes narrowed. And what's that? He didn't want to say Caleb's name. He didn't want to create a scandal at work. He didn't want to bring Caleb into Dylan's trap, but Garrett could still tell the truth. It's being honest, Garrett said quietly. Dylan scoffed. Honest gets you hurt. Garrett nodded slowly. Maybe, but lying got me hurt already. I'm done. Dylan stared at him for a long moment. Then Dylan straightened, smoothing his jacket. Watch your mouth, Dylan said. Garrett didn't flinch. Watch your hands, he replied. Dylan walked out, leaving the copy room colder. Garrett stayed for a moment longer, heart pounding, then went back to his desk. Later, Caleb found him in the hallway. Caleb's face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp with concern. Are you okay? He asked. Garrett exhaled. He threatened me. Caleb's jaw tightened. He did. Garrett didn't miss the way Caleb's hands curled slightly, like he wanted to act and needed to keep restraint. Tell me everything, Caleb said. Garrett did. He told Caleb exactly what Dylan said and how Dylan had looked. He told him about the fluorescent buzzing like a warning light. When Garrett finished, Caleb stood silently. The hallway noise faded, then returned. Caleb finally said, I'm going to handle it. Garrett looked up. How? Caleb's voice softened. By doing what I should have done earlier. By removing his influence and protecting you. Garrett swallowed. You don't have to keep doing this. Caleb's gaze held his. I do, because now, it's personal. The word personal made Garrett's stomach flutter. Caleb added quickly, like he was careful not to spook Garrett. Not in a reckless way, in a human way. Garrett's throat tightened. Human. Caleb's eyes flicked toward Garrett's hands like he wanted to reach for them. Then he forced himself not to in public. Come over tonight, Caleb said quietly. No work talk. Just be with me. I'll cook. We can eat with the kids on the couch if you want, or we can take them outside. Garrett blinked, stunned by the invitation. He thought about Theo being around Caleb. He thought about the risk, the vulnerability. He thought about how he'd sworn to himself that he couldn't build anything fragile. But he also remembered the truck, the way Caleb had asked permission, with his hand hovering. Garrett nodded slowly. Okay. Caleb smiled, relief softening his face. Thank you. By pickup the next day, they hadn't announced anything. They didn't have to. They just existed a little differently. Garrett's smile showed up more often. Caleb looked less guarded. Dylan stayed around, but his attention felt more like surveillance than friendship. That evening, Garrett came to Caleb's place with Theo and Eli. The apartment was warm, not fancy-lifting. There were school drawings on the fridge, a toy bin near the couch, stack of books with bent corners and dog-eared pages. Garrett stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure where to put his body. Caleb took that second to step forward and guide him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Shoes here, Caleb said. Garrett did what he was told, then realized he was listening, like this place already belonged to him. Caleb cooked, simple pasta with garlic and basil. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding Garrett in something familiar. Theo had Eli chasing him with a laugh that turned into a shriek and then into giggles. Their kids' noise softened the corners of the room. Garrett watched Caleb move around the kitchen with competence. Then pauses of tenderness like when Caleb adjusted Eli's sleeve before Eli put his plate down. Garrett's eyes stung again. He hadn't expected anyone to care about him the way Caleb cared about his kid. After dinner, the kids collapsed on the couch, with a movie playing low. Caleb sat close to Garrett, but not touching at first. He waited. Garrett felt the waiting like a hand hovering again. Garrett reached out first, slowly, and let his fingertips rest against Caleb's. Caleb's breath caught, and then he intertwined their hands gently. Garrett's throat tightened. "You're not straight anymore, huh?" Caleb's lips quirked, almost bashful. "I guess not." Garrett let out a shaky laugh. "How did you know?" Caleb looked at Garrett like the question mattered. "I didn't at first. I wanted to believe my life was supposed to look one way. I built habits. I buried feelings under work and routine. But routine doesn't fix hunger." Garrett swallowed. "And grief." Caleb's expression softened into something honest. "Grief showed me the cost of pretending." Garrett stared at their hands, the way Caleb's fingers fit. Garrett's like they'd been made for this shape. "I thought I was done needing anyone," Garrett whispered. Caleb nodded slowly. "I thought I was done being chosen." The sentence made Garrett's chest ache. After a while, Theo shifted on the couch and yawned, rubbing his eyes. Eli did the same. Caleb stood to help tuck them in. When Caleb came back, his hair was slightly messy, from moving quickly in the bedtime routine. Garrett noticed it and smiled despite himself. Caleb sat beside him. "They're asleep." Garrett nodded. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Caleb leaned forward and rested his forehead against Garrett's shoulder. Garrett closed his eyes. "I don't know what to do about Dylan," Caleb murmured. Garrett's eyes opened, focusing on Caleb's face. "What do you mean?" Caleb exhaled. "He's been holding something over me, not just work access, my past, my choices. He wants me to stay the man I used to be." Garrett's stomach turned. "So he's threatening your truth?" Caleb's eyes glistened. "Yes!" Garrett turned toward him, gently cupping Caleb's cheek. The touch made Caleb still. Garrett felt a tremor under Caleb's skin. "You don't have to keep being afraid," Garrett said. Caleb's voice shook. "You don't understand. I tried to be afraid on my own." "I tried to do it alone," Garrett swallowed. "We don't have to do it alone anymore." Caleb looked at Garrett like he'd been waiting years for that sentence. Then Caleb kissed him again. Slower this time, unhurried, asking with every movement. Garrett answered, letting his body remember what his heart had been too cautious to say. When they pulled back, Caleb's breathing was uneven. Garrett whispered, "Promise me something." Caleb's eyes searched his. "What?" "Don't hide," Garrett said. "Not from me. Not from yourself." Caleb's smile was small and trembling. "Okay." Garrett's eyes stung with tears that finally felt like relief instead of pain. "And I'll try not to run." Caleb nodded. "Deal." They sat together in the quiet apartment, the couch still warm from where the kids had slept. Garrett felt a new kind of fatigue, kind that came from tenderness instead of dread. Still, the story wasn't finished. At work the next week, higher management called Caleb into a meeting. Garrett watched Caleb leave, his heart tightening with the knowledge that the conflict would escalate. When Caleb returned, he didn't look angry. He looked determined. Garrett caught him after the meeting by the hallway windows. "What happened?" Garrett asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I brought everything to HR. The edits, the access trail, the way Dylan tried to intimidate you." Garrett stared, shocked. "You did?" Caleb nodded. "I did." Garrett felt relief pour through him so hard, it almost made him dizzy. Caleb continued, voice low, "And I told them the conflict between workplace rules and personal boundaries. I made sure it was about process and protection, not about gossip." Garrett swallowed. "What about Dylan?" Caleb's eyes hardened. "He's facing consequences. He may fight it. but for the first time, the evidence is clean and documented. Garrett exhaled. Thank you. Caleb didn't smile fully. He looked at Garrett like he was trying to say something without using words that could get them hurt. Garrett understood. Anyway, Caleb's kindness wasn't just about protecting Garrett's job. It was about protecting the version of Garrett who still believed in love. At pickup that day, Dylan walked over before Garrett could get Theo's backpack adjusted. Dylan's smile was practiced. Garrett? We should talk. Garrett's body stiffened. Caleb stepped closer, instantly, but didn't block. Garrett just stood beside him like a silent boundary. Dylan looked at Caleb with a flicker of irritation. This doesn't involve you. Caleb's eyes didn't move. Actually, it does. I handled it. Dylan's smile thinned. You handled it. That's cute. Garrett swallowed. His voice stayed calm, even as his pulse hammered. What do you want, Dylan? Dylan leaned in slightly, eyes glinting. I want you to stop making trouble, and I want you to keep your new life private. Garrett's throat tightened. Private? Dylan's grin widened, crueler this time. Yes, keep it hidden. Keep it small. Garrett looked at Caleb then. Caleb's expression was steady. His shoulders were square. His eyes told Garrett he was ready. Garrett realized then that this was Caleb's fight too. Garrett's grief had taught him what happens when you hide. You shrink. You disappear. You let other people decide the shape of your life. Garrett didn't want that anymore. Garrett straightened his posture and met Dylan's gaze. No. Dylan blinked, surprised by the refusal. Garrett continued, voice even. You don't get to control my life. Not after everything you did at work. Not after you threatened me. Not after you tried to scare Caleb into going back to pretending. Dylan's face hardened. You don't know what you're saying? Garrett nodded slowly. I do. I know what I saw. And Caleb knows what he saw too. And now everyone will know. Dylan's eyes flashed with fury. You think you're brave? Garrett's throat tightened, but his voice didn't break. I think I'm done being afraid. Caleb stepped forward slightly, his voice calm and firm. Dylan, stop. Walk away, or I'll have security handle the situation. Dylan stared at him, stunned by the authority in Caleb's tone. For a moment, the parking lot felt like it held its breath. Then Dylan scoffed and walked away, moving toward his car like he'd lost control of the scene. Garrett's hands shook when Theo ran up, excited about a sticker someone had given him. Dad, can we have ice cream? Theo asked. Garrett smiled through the tremor. Yes, we can. Theo looked at Garrett's face, concerned. You okay? Garrett knelt, so Theo could see his eyes clearly. I'm okay. I'm just proud of myself. Theo frowned, then grinned like he understood in his own child way. I'm proud of you too. Garrett's eyes stung again, but this time it felt like warmth in a cold room. That night, after Theo fell asleep, Caleb came into Garrett's mind again. The truck, the confession, the quiet kisses that felt like safety. Garrett sat at his kitchen table and stared at his phone. He typed a message to Caleb and paused before sending. Finally, he sent, Are you home? Caleb replied, Yes, come over if you want. Garrett stared at the screen. The words should have been ordinary, come over if you want, but Garrett heard the deeper truth. Caleb wasn't just inviting him into a moment, Caleb was inviting him into a future. Garrett got his keys and grabbed Theo's spare jacket just in case. He walked out with the careful, hopeful steps of someone learning how to live again. When Garrett arrived at Caleb's place, Caleb opened a door before Garrett even reached for the handle. Caleb's face was lit with a quiet relief. He pulled Garrett inside and kissed him like an answer. When they pulled apart, Caleb whispered, They can't take this from us. Garrett closed his eyes briefly. The statement wasn't arrogant, it was pleading. Like Caleb wanted to believe the world would be kind for once. Garrett nodded. They can't. They stood in the hallway, their foreheads touching, not rushing into anything beyond the tenderness they'd earned. Garrett imagined explaining everything to Theo one day. Not in a dramatic way. In a gentle way, in a way that made the truth feel normal instead of dangerous. He imagined Caleb being there, in the small moments, helping with homework, carrying Theo's backpack when Theo's tired, making dinner when grief came back like a shadow. He imagined Dylan being replaced by something better, by the sound of peace. Caleb's voice softened. Whatever happens at work, I choose you. Garrett opened his eyes and looked at Caleb. He felt the weight of everything they'd survived. Grief, risk, awkward pickups, the boss-employee line, Dylan's manipulation. He also felt the lightness of what they were building now. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real. Garrett whispered, "Then I choose you too." And that was how the story ended, at least for now. Not with a dramatic promise, not with fireworks, but with a simple human decision made in a warm hallway at the edge of a night that finally felt like it belonged to them. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, Garrett and Caleb held each other with the quiet certainty of people who had been afraid for too long and had finally found a reason to stop running.